He scrubbed the floors of the building that hunted his people. Every morning, before the sun warmed the streets of occupied Holland, he unlocked the doors of a Nazi headquarters and stepped inside. He carried a mop, a bucket, and the quiet posture of a man meant to be ignored. German boots passed inches from his hands. SS officers barked orders over his head. Names were typed, stamped, filed, and sent to their deaths above him. And no one noticed the janitor. They never noticed how long he lingered in the hallways. They never questioned why he knew the schedule so well. They never asked why a man trusted to clean the heart of the occupation was never searched on his way out. That was their mistake. Because inside that building, where arrest lists were written and transport orders signed, a Dutch janitor was hiding Jews in plain sight. This is how it began. Before the war, he was invisible in the most ordinary way. Middle-aged, Dutch, a laborer who kept his head down and his opinions to himself. He had grown up poor, learned early that survival often meant silence. He was not a politician, not a soldier, not a man whose name would ever appear in newspapers. When Germany invaded the Netherlands in May of 1940, his life narrowed even further. Curfews, ration cards, German flags on Dutch buildings. The quiet, suffocating sense that the country had been swallowed whole. Like many others, he needed work, any work. The economy collapsed under occupation, and the Germans were always hiring. Translators, clerks, drivers, cleaners. The job posting was simple. Janitorial staff needed for a government office, stable pay, food coupons, protection from forced labor in Germany. He applied because hunger leaves little room for pride. Only after he was hired did he realize where he would be working. The building belonged to the Sicherheitsdienst, the SD, Nazi intelligence and internal security. The men inside it did not wear the dust of the front lines. They wore pressed uniforms and carried clipboards, pistols, and absolute authority. This was where Dutch resistance members were interrogated, where Jews were identified, tracked, and prepared for deportation, where fear was processed into paperwork. On his first day, he was issued a badge and a set of keys. He was told where he could walk, where he could not. He was warned never to listen, never to speak, never to look an officer in the eye. He nodded. He said, "Yes, sir," in broken German. He lowered his head, and he watched everything. The corridors taught him the rhythm of terror. Mornings were administrative. Afternoons brought arrests. Evenings were for reports. The janitor learned which offices handled transport lists, which desks held sealed envelopes, which trash bins contained shredded lives that had not been shredded well enough. He learned which officers drank too much, which ones were careless, which ones enjoyed cruelty, and which preferred efficiency. Most of all, he learned that the Germans did not see him as human. To them, he was furniture. At first, he told himself he was lucky. Lucky to be alive, lucky to be paid, lucky to avoid the factories in Germany where men disappeared by the thousands. Then, one day, while mopping outside an interrogation room, he heard a familiar sound. Dutch. A man inside was begging in his own language. His voice was hoarse, already breaking. He spoke a name, a wife, 2 children. The janitor froze, his hands tightening around the wooden handle. An officer laughed. A chair scraped. Something heavy struck flesh. That night, the janitor did not sleep. He began to notice the lists more carefully. Names typed in neat columns, addresses, dates. He recognized streets, neighborhoods,
people who could have been his neighbors, people who might already be gone by the time the ink dried. The building stopped being just a workplace. It became a machine, and he was inside its gears. The first time he helped someone, he did not plan it. A young Jewish woman had been arrested for carrying false papers. She was brought into the building late in the afternoon, terrified, shaking, her coat still damp from the rain. The janitor watched as she was led past him, her eyes wide, already searching for exits that did not exist. Later that evening, he was told to clean a storage room in the basement. It was rarely used, dim, cold. As he unlocked the door, he heard breathing. She was there, crouched behind crates, left temporarily while paperwork was processed upstairs, forgotten for the moment, not secured. He stood in the doorway for a long time, long enough to walk away, long enough to pretend he never saw her. Instead, he closed the door quietly behind him. He told her to be silent. He pointed to his mop, his badge. He whispered that he worked there. She stared at him as if he were mad. Helping her meant death, not imprisonment, not a trial, death. For him, for anyone connected to him. The janitor understood that perfectly. He hid her in that basement room until nightfall. When the building emptied, he guided her through service corridors used for trash and supplies. He unlocked a rear door. He told her to run and never return.
She did. The next morning, no one mentioned her. The machine rolled on, unaware it had lost a part. That was when the janitor realized something dangerous. The Germans trusted their system more than they trusted their eyes, and the system trusted him. From then on, he began to work deliberately. He memorized patrol patterns. He learned which stairwells were watched and which were ignored. He discovered that storage rooms were rarely checked if paperwork said they were sealed. Paperwork was everything. He started small. A man hidden in a supply closet for an hour. A woman kept in a file room overnight. Each rescue was a gamble that tightened his chest and left his hands shaking long after it was over. He never spoke to the resistance. He had no handlers, no backup. Contacting others meant exposure. Exposure meant death. So he worked alone, inside the enemy's house. The irony was brutal. Jews were safest inside Nazi headquarters because no one believed they could be there. He forged nothing. He stole nothing that could be traced. He moved people like shadows between margins of error. Sometimes he altered nothing at all. He learned that arrest lists were often printed twice, one copy for transport, one for records. If a name vanished between printing and filing, the discrepancy was blamed on clerical error. A missing person became an unresolved line item. Clerical errors were common. He learned where wastebaskets were emptied and where they were not. He learned which offices burned documents and which simply discarded them. He learned that janitors had access everywhere. As months passed, the risks multiplied. More guards, more inspections, more paranoia. The Germans knew the resistance was active. They knew people were slipping away. They did not know how. Suspicion never fell on the man with the mop. He listened to officers complain about Dutch treachery while he cleaned their boots. He heard jokes about executions while he wiped ashtrays. He stood in rooms where death warrants were signed and thought about the people whose lives he might still reach. But the danger was always close. One evening, while hiding a family in a disused records room, he heard footsteps outside the door. An officer rattled the handle. The lock held. The janitor stood between the door and the people behind him, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure it could be heard. The officer cursed and walked away. After that night, the janitor knew he was no longer reacting. He was operating. And operations attract attention. By 1943, the building was under pressure. Arrests increased. Files grew thicker. Inspections became frequent and unpredictable. The Germans searched for leaks, for saboteurs, for anyone undermining their grip. One afternoon, the janitor was summoned to an office he rarely entered. An SS officer sat behind a desk, his uniform immaculate, his eyes sharp. The janitor was told to stand still. The officer studied him for a long moment, then spoke softly. There had been irregularities, missing names, unaccounted detainees. Someone inside the building was interfering with procedures. The officer asked a simple question. How long had the janitor been working there? The man answered calmly, giving the date, the same date written in his file upstairs. The officer nodded. He dismissed him. As the janitor left the room, his legs felt weak, because he understood something now. The walls were closing in, the margin for error was shrinking, and if he made one mistake, not only would he die inside that building, but every life he had touched would unravel behind him. Still, the next day he came to work. He unlocked the doors, he filled his bucket, he stepped into the headquarters of the Nazi occupation, and he kept hiding people where no one thought to look. For a little while longer.
For a little while longer. That was how he measured time now, not in days or weeks, but in borrowed moments. One more name erased, one more door quietly unlocked, one more human being moved out of the reach of the machine. But the machine was learning. By late 1943, the headquarters changed its habits. Offices that once stayed open now locked early. Storage rooms were inventoried. Guards were rotated without warning. Even the janitors were watched, casually at first, then with intent. The man with the mop felt it immediately. Conversation stopped when he entered a room. Officers began asking him to wait while they finished their work. His badge was checked more often. Once, an SS man followed him down a hallway, boots echoing behind him, close enough to smell tobacco and leather. He did not turn around. The building had become a trap, and he was inside it every day. Still, people came. Jews fleeing roundups, resistance couriers exposed by informants, families with nowhere left to hide. Word had spread quietly, carefully, passed mouth to mouth like contraband. There was a janitor. He worked inside. He could help. Each request tightened the noose. The last rescue nearly ended everything. A teenage boy, no more than 16, was arrested during a street sweep and brought in with a group of detainees. The janitor recognized the name on the intake sheet. He had seen the boy before, delivering bread to a nearby neighborhood. That night, the boy was placed in a holding room pending transfer the next morning. There would be no delay this time, no clerical confusion. The transport was scheduled, the paperwork was clean. If the janitor did nothing, the boy would be gone by sunrise. He waited until the building quieted, until even the night clerks grew bored and careless. He took his keys, his bucket, and walked as if on routine. The holding room door opened easily. The boy looked up, eyes hollow, already stripped of hope. The janitor said nothing. He handed him a janitor's coat, oversized and stained. He told him to lower his head and walk when told. They moved through corridors that smelled of ink and disinfectant. Twice guards passed them. Twice no one looked twice. At the rear of the building, something went wrong. A guard stepped out of an office unexpectedly. He looked at the boy, looked at the coat, looked back at the janitor. The pause lasted only a second, long enough. The guard asked for identification. The janitor handed over his badge. The guard examined it slowly, too slowly. Then he asked about the boy. The janitor said the word that had saved lives before: cleaning. The guard frowned. He reached for the boy's sleeve. And then, somewhere upstairs, an officer shouted. A phone rang.
a distraction, small but sudden. The guard hesitated, torn between curiosity and duty. He waved them through. The rear door closed behind them. The boy ran into the dark and vanished. The janitor stood alone, shaking, knowing something had shifted. The next morning, the building erupted. The missing detainee triggered alarms. Files were pulled, offices searched, guards interrogated. The system turned inward, hunting for the fault. This time, the fault had a face. The janitor was taken into a side room. His bucket was kicked aside. His keys were removed from his belt. An officer asked him to sit. The questions were calm. Where had he been the night before? Which rooms had he cleaned? Had he noticed anything unusual? He answered slowly, carefully, truth wrapped in irrelevance. Then they searched him. They found nothing. No forged papers, no notes, no lists. But suspicion does not require evidence. They dismissed him again, but the air had changed. He felt it in the silence that followed him down the halls, in the way eyes tracked his movements. He understood the truth then. His time was over. If he stayed, he would be caught, and when he was caught, the machine would demand names. It would pull at every thread he had ever touched. That night, he did not hide anyone. Instead, he destroyed what he could. He burned scraps of paper left too long in bins. He swapped files. He loosened locks and jammed drawers. Small acts of sabotage meant to confuse and delay. At dawn, he finished his rounds, and he did not return. The janitor disappeared into occupied Holland like so many others. No notice, no arrest, no record. To the Nazis, he became another administrative anomaly. The building continued its work, never fully understanding how much damage had been done from inside its walls. The war dragged on. Deportations continued. So did resistance, so did loss. But dozens of people lived who should not have. Men, women, children who passed through Nazi headquarters and walked back out again. After the liberation of the Netherlands, records were opened, files were examined, survivors spoke. A pattern emerged. Names that vanished, arrests that went nowhere, detainees who were logged but never transferred. Investigators traced the anomalies back to one building and to one employee. The janitor did not step forward immediately. He had survived the occupation by becoming invisible again, returning to ordinary labor, to quiet streets and long nights. When asked why he did it, his answer was simple. He said he was already there. He said the Germans trusted him. He said if he had done nothing, he would never have forgiven himself. No medals were pinned to his chest during the war. No speeches were made of him standing tall. His weapon had been a mop, his camouflage insignificance. Historians would later struggle to count exactly how many lives he saved. The nature of his work made certainty impossible. Some estimates say dozens, others suggest more. But numbers were never the point. What mattered was where he stood. Inside the headquarters of terror, where fear was organized and efficiency replaced mercy, one ordinary man chose to sabotage the system, not with violence, but with patience. He proved something the Nazis never understood, that power depends on blind spots, and that the people they consider invisible are often the most dangerous of all. Long after the war, survivors would speak of a man who whispered instructions in dark hallways, of a cleaner who unlocked doors that were never meant to open, of safety found in the last place it should have existed. They rarely knew his name. They only knew that he had been there. In the end, the janitor did not overthrow the regime. He did not stop the trains. He did not end the war. But inside the heart of the machine, he broke its perfection. And sometimes that is enough. Because history is not only shaped by generals and governments, it is shaped by the quiet choices of those who refuse to accept the role assigned to them. A janitor was told to clean. Instead, he saved lives. And in doing so, he left a stain on the Nazi system that no amount of scrubbing could ever erase.